So, hey everyone, I have the fantastic pleasure of speaking with the one and only Nathan Wilcox today. How's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thanks for being on. Uh, I've definitely been on the sidelines for Zcash for many years. Uh, Paid attention to it keenly though, because privacy is one of the first things that got me interested in crypto before I realized how the pseudonymous nature of Bitcoin didn't really work out super well long term. In fact, I was one of those early people who, when they introduced HD wallets, when you get a new address every time, I got mad at them because I'm like, why not? I want to stick to my old address. This is easier. I got mad that I had to
Yeah.
do new ones. I didn't get it. And then since then, of course, there's a giant rabbit hole you go down. And, then we ended up to today. So, would you mind really quick introducing yourself and your relation to the project?
Yeah, my name's Nate Wilcox. I work at Electric Coin Company. So um, we launched Zcash originally in 2016, and now we're one of several organizations that focus on Zcash development. And I've had different roles throughout the life of the company, and right now my role is Chief Research Officer. So I'm mainly focused on protocol and usability research.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a big fan of specifically the usability part of things because
Mhm.
we're finally getting to the stage where it's feasible to use cryptocurrencies for real things if you're not a crazy person like me.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's something that I think that a lot of even non-crypto apps and services get wrong. Um, but let's go through I kind of want to make this the bring everyone up to speed on Zcash kind of episode because
Okay.
obviously a lot of people have heard about Zcash as one of the privacy coins. I'm
Mhm.
talking just the crypto headlines, whatever just goes through people's heads, and just not really. I don't really hear a lot about the narrative from those kind of public spaces over the last many years. And then you dig under the hood, and unlike a lot of crypto projects, Zcash has evolved significantly since day one. And I mean,
Yeah.
even as someone like me who pays attention, I mean, used to be a journalist for Cointelegraph back in the day, even that kind of stuff, a lot of these things sort of slipped by me. So, first, would you mind, from your perspective, why was Zcash founded? That what need does Zcash fill that was not currently being addressed by other projects? Because we have other, for example, we had a lot of CoinJoin based privacy implementations. We had Monero using the more ring signature approach, etc. We had Zero Coin already implemented as an encrypted kind of method for Zcoin. But
Mhm.
where did Zcash come from? Why was it need? Why did the world need Zcash?
Yeah. So um, let's see. Where it came from was a set of researchers had been able to integrate zero knowledge proving with a payment system like a distributed ledger. And they published a research paper called Zero Cash. And they approached Bitcoin developers at a Bitcoin conference I think it was in San Jose around 2013, showing how they had done this work to integrate really strong privacy into the Bitcoin layer one. Um, and the sort of feedback they got at that conference was the technology is like too new and risky for Bitcoin, and it makes certain trade-offs that the general Bitcoin development community wasn't comfortable with. And so the sort of advice they came away with was if we want to see this technology deployed in a real world cryptocurrency, then maybe the best path is to start a new one with that technology integrated. So then they ended up reaching out to Zuko, and I'm his brother, and I was working with him at a company called Least Authority, and we were focused on developing decentralized storage technology with strong privacy. and also doing security auditing of open source applications, with a specialty in focusing on cryptography or cryptographic engineering and security and privacy. So they approached us, and we created a spinoff from that company. And originally, we called ourselves the Zcash company.
I remember that.
And then we basically just productionized the research paper into a blockchain and launched it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for the real, just very briefly, I guess like a 1 or 2 sentence thing, why, how is zero cash fundamentally different from zero coin as far as, securing privacy on cryptocurrency networks?
Yeah. So my understanding of Zero Coin, which was earlier research that they had done, or a subset of those researchers had done, is that it provided sort of a system where you could deposit an amount into like a private shielded fund.
Yeah.
And then you could also withdraw later. And the deposits and the withdrawals wouldn't be necessarily linked. But there was no way inherently to transfer funds that were shielded. And also there were other limitations. So for example, the amount you deposited would be fixed. So there might be different like denominations. So you might have like the $1 bucket and the $10 bucket. So those limitations, are pretty inconvenient if your goal is to make just a digital cash where you can basically just have like a private balance and you transfer it to others any amount you want. And so those were some of the main like usability improvements of Zero Cash that we launched with.
Yeah. So basically, a lot of times, and a lot of people don't really know this because I think that privacy is one of the least understood parts of crypto. But for example, when you do things like, say, a coin join, or you have to pay very specific attention, you don't give any extra info away by having 2 unique amounts, for example, or using change that's left over from transactions and things. And so, yeah, that does, like, the usability nightmare of just having to organize all that kind of stuff kind of makes it almost guaranteed this kind of thing will not be used at scale. And so, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So then we go to the founding of Zcash, and a few things that, like, when you get like the kind of basic info card on Zcash from back in the day, the few things that stick out are 2.5-minute block time, a proof of work mined currency, and then obviously this optional privacy function. And you get, I believe, was a 20% founders reward for a few years that would go to what became the Electric Coin Company. Is that kind of a good summary of the very founding?
Yeah, that's sort of like a bullet list you could see in a summary page. The founders reward was issued. So whenever a new block was created, new coins are issued. And the founders reward was 20% of the new issuance, and the other 80% went to miners. And then the founders reward funds were actually split among several parties, only one of which was Electric Coin Company. There's plenty of information about this online. If you just Google for Zcash Founders Reward, we published blog posts sort of dissecting it in a lot of detail with a lot of transparency. So in addition to some of the funds going to founders, some of the funds went to the company itself to continue operating. And then a large proportion of the founders actually donated a significant share of those coins to establish the Zcash Foundation. So during the Founders Reward era, which has ended, a significant amount went to Electric Coin Company and then to the Zcash Foundation.
Yeah. So, which years was the Founders Reward active during?
So it was active up through the first halving, so 4 years.
Yeah. And so, what happened after that? And that's kind of something that I sort of pieced together a little bit over time, but I think a lot of the world just didn't even pay attention to that. It was kind of like they stuck with the bullet point of, oh, there's the Founders Reward. But it
Yeah.
expired. And I do remember some community discussion about how to not necessarily renew the Founders Reward, but as to figure out another funding mechanism for development and other things that would be continued on. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I also wanted to clarify dates because I said the first 4 years. Zcash launched October 28th of 2016.
Mm-hmm.
So we're coming up on our birthday. And
Nice.
yeah, so that was 2016 through 2020. Um, and starting around 2018, people started having discussions about, okay, what's going to happen when the Founders Reward ends? Because it was the primary source of funding for Electric Coin Company and the Zcash Foundation. And people were wondering, okay, uh, if it ends, then so there were different ideas of what could happen. One would be it would just end, and then the network would sort of transition to be more like Bitcoin. And then there were others advocating for setting up a new kind of development fund that came from new coin issuance. So that discussion started, I think, around 2018 and sort of proceeded for a couple of years. Um, and yeah, there's a lot that went into it, a lot of discussion, a lot of like contention and negotiation and sort of a sprawling community. And the outcome was to establish a new fund that also comes from new coin issuance that's called the Development Fund.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also defined sort of with a fixed term for 4 years. So it began in 2020 and is set to expire in 2024.
Yeah. And so, where does that new issuance era, where's the new issuance fund goes? Um, Sorry for the messy phrasing there. I'm thinking a million things at the same time. But not
Yeah.
just like where's it supposed to go? Like where's the ultimate destination of this? And then also where does it actually show up from the Coinbase and go into?
Yeah, good questions. But actually, before digging into that, I want to talk a little bit more about the process to get there.
All
So
right.
during that 2 year era when the discussions began, Zcash Foundation sort of stepped up because one of their sort of mandates was to be a steward of the protocol and to represent the community. And so they organized a way to do like a referendum, basically. And so there was this period where, especially in like the final year, uh, people could submit different proposals, and there were different ways to assess how much support there were for different proposals. And then some of the proposals sort of iterated. And so there was a wide range of ideas. The proposal that eventually got ratified was called ZIP 1014.
Mm-hmm.
And so that sort of defines the development fund at a high level. And that ZIP specifies that those funds go to 3 organizations. So that's Electric Coin Company, Zcash Foundation, and a grants body that gives out grants to grant applicants for improving Zcash or the ecosystem or the community. So that's what we have today. The first iteration of the grants body was called Zcash Open Major Grants, ZOMG. And
Fun acronym.
yeah, they so that's a board of 5 contributors who get elected through a body that Zcash Foundation established called the Community Advisory Panel. And those elections happen each year. So each year, a set of 5 basically volunteers who nominate themselves or who other people nominate get voted in to be on that board, and then they hand out grants. And so I think it's in its 3rd iteration now, and it's been renamed to Zcash Community Grants.
Yeah. So, what happens with the block reward as far as getting to those pots? Are there 3 separate, I guess, addresses or wallets for these kinds of purposes that then, with the Coinbase, they just automatically end up in those things? Is there one area where they end up and then they get redistributed by another party? Like, how does that work out on a technical level?
That's a great question, because I feel like where the sort of like policies or intentions of the community actually meet concrete consensus rules, it's a really important like touch point for security and governance. So the actual consensus rules define 3 different recipient addresses for each block and a proportion of ZEC that go to each. So each of those 3 organizations has their own address. And so, there's a few notable things about that. One is it's baked into the consensus rules rather than a kind of like legal agreement. So that's a very notable aspect. So if the community or anyone wanted to like change who the recipients are or the amounts or whatever, they could do that by basically proposing different consensus rules and getting people to run that. And there might be a chain split because it would be sort of a hard forking upgrade, but that's feasible. So there's sort of this, general referendum potential to alter that structure. And then legally, both Zcash Foundation and Electric Coin Company are U.S. Entities, U.S. corporations. And today they're both, so the actual recipient for Electric Coin Company is a nonprofit called Bootstrap organization. And Zcash Foundation is also a nonprofit. This is getting a little messy in the weeds, but I think it's really useful for people to know about.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
So Bootstrap is a nonprofit, and then it is the sole owner of Electric Coin Company. So all of the previous owners donated their equity to this nonprofit. And then Zcash Foundation is like I don't know the exact terminology or legal ins and outs, but they are like a fiduciary sponsor sort of the community grants panel. So even though there's separate addresses in the consensus rules, Zcash Foundation is legally responsible for those funds. And so it basically, the grants committee is like, I think of it as like an advisory body, and then Zcash Foundation is sort of committed to distributing those funds according to what the grants panel endorses.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the beginning to end, start to finish picture of the self-funding mechanism. And let's go through some of the other things that have evolved at the time. So first off, the block time, right? So this is something that's one of the things most people are most ignorant about as far as cryptocurrencies as a whole, but also more particular, I'm sure, Zcash. So Bitcoin has a 10-minute block time. All its major forks do. Then you have the Litecoins and Dashes and all those of the world with a 2.5-minute block time, and Monero's about 2 minutes from my recollection, although I could be wrong on that. So Zcash started out with a 2.5-minute block interval, right?
Yes.
And why was that number specifically arrived on?
So when we were launching Zcash, when we were designing it pre-launch, we examined a lot around the design space. So we were actually somewhat aware of proof of stake at that time. We thought about like ASIC resistance. We thought about like changes to the monetary policy. We thought about all kinds of stuff, but we mainly settled on this rubric of, hey, let's just take something that we know works really well, which is Bitcoin at that time, and change that design as little as possible just to make a usable production quality cryptocurrency network that had the new zero cash shielded transfer technology. But we did tweak a few things. So one of them was the block time and also the block size limit. And so the block size limit, we changed from Bitcoin, which had the 1 megabyte limit, we changed that to 2 megabytes. And then we changed the block time from 10 minutes to 2.5 minutes. And we chose those parameters just based on the notion that it would be helpful to have like a higher total transaction rate possible. And at the same time, we didn't feel that those were too extreme in a way that would lead to excessive resource needs for full nodes. So we didn't think it would be very centralizing on full nodes. And so, yeah, we thought we can just tweak these parameters to have a higher transaction throughput rate. But there was another wrinkle to that because the shielded transfer functionality uses a lot of space. And part of the reason for that is we included a feature called an encrypted memo. So every transfer has an encrypted memo, has space for one, even if the user doesn't use it, because we want to make sure all transactions are indistinguishable when they're shielded. But the encrypted memo allows the sender to include a small message with any transfer to a recipient. So because those transactions were larger, this was another motivation for like increasing the block size and lowering the block target time.
Yeah, so that encrypted memo, other than the fact that it's obviously encrypted, how is this basically analogous to like a signed message for Bitcoin with like an op return, or is it something completely different?
It is different in the protocol. So it's just a specific to Zcash, and it's just part of the transaction format. And it also has different properties for users and usability. So the properties are anyone receiving a payment can see the amount of the payment and also the encrypted memo. They don't see the source of the payment if it's shielded. So if you send from a shielded wallet to a shielded recipient, they don't see the sending address. They just see the amount and the memo. And the memo contents are invisible to everyone else. So like in Bitcoin, op return is visible and it uses more space. So even though people like to talk about how blockchains are censorship resistant, I'm of the opinion that when everyone can see the transaction contents, they can discriminate against the transactions in any way that they want to. And so one kind of discrimination might be we don't like op returns, or we don't like op returns that are too big, or we don't like op returns that have certain kinds of contents.
Yeah.
Memos don't have that issue because no one can see them.
Yeah. So now we start with a 2.5 minute block interval, and that gets cut, I believe, in half, right? At some point.
Yeah. So we've had, let's see, I'm counting, we've had 6 upgrades since we launched. And all of these upgrades are hard forking consensus changes.
Yeah.
We call them upgrades because fork can mean multiple things. So it can mean somebody just cloning source code. It can mean the chain splitting, or it can mean consensus rules that are incompatible with each other.
Yeah.
And so far, we've never had a chain split due to an upgrade. We have had a chain split due to people intentionally wanting to do a chain split, and they split off a new coin called Ycash. And that's kind of exactly the vision we've had, where we don't want accidental chain splits or chain splits due to security flaws. But
Purposeful
if
only.
wants, yeah, purposeful only. And actually that ties into, sorry, I know you asked about the shorter block times.
Yes.
But an earlier upgrade, in fact, the first upgrade we made was basically to make the consensus protocol more resilient and safe if anyone ever wants to intentionally split the chain. So that first upgrade we called Overwinter. That was in 2018. And that added a versioning scheme to how transactions are verified, so that anytime anyone wants to do an upgrade or do an intentional split, they can choose unique versions, and that ensures that transactions are incompatible on the two sides of the split. So that prevents replay attacks, which had plagued Bitcoin during the Bitcoin Cash split and Ethereum during the Ethereum Classic split. And our thinking was, I mean, a lot of people in cryptocurrency sort of think like, oh, a chain split is really bad and we need to prevent it. But my thinking is more like a chain split happens either unintentionally for security reasons, like due to security flaws, or intentionally. Let's make sure it never happens unintentionally for Zcash. But when it's intentional, that's because people want to do that. And permissionlessness means people should be able to do what they want. So if people are going to want to do that, let's just make it as safe as possible.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And there are quite a number of Zcash spinoffs. I don't know. I believe so. Like Ycash is the one that actually forked that split the main chain.
Yeah.
Z Classic was there. Was that just kind of I mean, I'm not trying to be derogatory in saying it, but like a copy paste just without the founder's reward?
Yeah, there's been several projects that clone the source code and then launch their own chain. I don't really have a high opinion of any of them. Many of them seem actually pretty scammy to me.
Yeah.
But Ycash, I don't see that way. I think of Ycash as like really principled. They also split the chain, and so it's the only Zcash derived cryptocurrency I'm aware of that I'm not dubious about.
Yeah, well, I mean that is one of those things where back in the early days of when the first altcoins, as they were called at the time, I don't like that term anymore, but kind of came out, where everything was like, well, this is a Bitcoin, but this parameter, which mostly is just an excuse for buy my coin so I get rich kind of thing. And so it's kind of a sign of a good thing. If you have a good thing, people are going to try to make a quick, easy buck off of it. And then the people trying to be in there for the longer term, for what's actually for, are kind of going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
So we have the short block times, right? The shortened block times. What was the rationale behind shortening that even further?
Yeah, so that happened. So first there was Overwinter. The next one was Sapling, which was a really major upgrade to the zero knowledge
Mm-hmm.
proving stuff, which made it possible to do the shielded transfers like on a mobile phone, whereas previously they were like very heavyweight, could only
Yeah.
be done on like desktops or laptops. And then after Sapling was an upgrade called Blossom,
Mm-hmm.
and that basically only shortened the block times. It made maybe a few other minor changes, and that halved the block time. So it went from like 150 seconds to 75 seconds. And um, the motivation there, again, we thought it would be relatively safe in terms of decentralization and performance. And we wanted to just improve Zcash as a means of exchange for payments, because that's always been one of our goals, is to, in terms of usability and scalability. So we
Mm-hmm.
want it to be very useful for both store of value, but also medium of exchange use cases. So that was the main motivation there.
Yeah, and so I mean, obviously, I'm not too knowledgeable about all this stuff, but are there any concerns over scaling, making the shorter block times more challenging for like block propagation purposes?
Yes, I mean, we analyzed to some degree what kind of impact that might have on the like resilience of mining, because when the target time gets small enough and the average time it takes blocks to propagate gets large enough, that like erodes the resilience of proof of work mining, because there's more rollbacks, which sort of reintroduces inefficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
So we did look at that, and we considered it safe enough to try. Yeah.
Yeah, and so before we get into like the heart of the thing, which is of course the fun stuff, the privacy,
Mhm.
there's been a lot of talk about proof of stake recently. Now, as
Mhm.
far as I know, Zcash is still 100% proof of work at the moment. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
So since the beginning, and basically without fail, even though there was a switchover in the mechanism, it's been an 80% of the block reward goes to miners the entire
Mhm.
way through, and it's entirely a proof of work consensus method
Yep.
cryptocurrency. But there's been a lot of talk to where the outside impression seems to make it seem more like a certainty or an eventuality that a move to
Mhm.
proof of stake might be the right thing. So,
Mm.
is this something that's planned like explicitly first? And if so, what's the kind of time frame and what's the rationale behind something like that?
Yeah. So, okay, there's a lot behind that question. First of
Sorry, I
all,
package a lot in there.
yeah. Well, I'll sort of like pick apart some key points that I think are important. So, first of all, Electric Coin Company made a blog post. I don't know. I want to say roughly 6 months or more ago,
Hmm.
where we basically advocated that Zcash should switch to proof of stake. Um, but there's like multiple organizations and other individuals and groups developing Zcash, and then there's all of the users. So whether or not the network actually does transition to proof of stake depends on those users and other developers. Um, so that's the first piece, because
Hmm.
you asked like how certain it was, and
Yeah.
I guess that remains to be seen. Um, from just sort of our informal uh, analysis of like feedback we got after posting that blog post and tweeting about it, it seems to us that most of the feedback we hear is pretty positive about transitioning to proof of stake. There is a vocal minority that is concerned about that, or that wants to remain on proof of work. Um, but they do seem like a minority to us, just in terms of number of people we're interacting with. But again, it's really hard to tell. This is a challenge we've always had with Zcash. It's hard to tell. Okay, but what do users want generally? Like, it's how do we know what the users want? It's a really hard problem. Like, we have like public calls, we have a forum, we tweet, we write blog posts, but it's always hard to tell how representative any of that is for the actual users.
Yeah, of course. It's something that's kind of easy to Sybil attack. And like, I've been in the crypto space for a long time, and I've noticed a few times like a clear disparity between what seems in some case and what ends up being the actual consensus. One of those ones that relatively recently was the Thorchain community. When the whole Tornado Cash drama blew up, there was a strong voice that seemed to say, let's not add coins like Zcash because we're not censorship resistant enough yet, and we would just ruin everyone's money and the whole project if we did that. And I know that Zcash, as of right now at least, is being worked on for addition to Thorchain. And it got to the point where the I think the official Twitter, if that's even a thing, did mention something along those lines. And then when the nodes themselves, i.e. the bondholders, the actual money and users, were formally polled, it ended up being pretty overwhelming in support of privacy, of adding privacy assets, in fact, sooner rather than later. And so it was kind of interesting where a few loud voices turned this tide, made this impression of this giant movement, and then it ended up being that when you polled the actual users and the money behind the project, it turned out to not be quite like that.
Yeah, it's a big risk in governance. And one thing that I would like to see in Zcash is a way to do safe, reliable coin holder polling, like coin weighted polling, which has a bunch of trade-offs. Like, some people don't like coin weighted because it feels like, gives the biggest voice to the biggest holders. And, that's probably like exchanges.
Yeah.
But it has some benefits. So one is it's Sybil resistant because of the base scarcity of the coin. And it doesn't require, there's like, if the mechanism is designed well, there's no gatekeeping. Like, you don't have to have an account anywhere. You can just participate. Any user can participate with a wallet. That would be the ideal. We're not there yet with Zcash. So like Electric Coin Company has experimented with doing coin weighted polling in several occasions, including like that initial big discussion about how to change funding. We had like a coin weighted poll, but it was really like hacky. Like, in order to participate in it, you would have to jump through a bunch of hoops, easy to make mistakes, sort of put your coins at risk and stuff. So it wasn't a very good mechanism other than as like an experiment or a pilot. But I would really like to see coin weighted polling as like one sort of input into governance, not like full binding governance, like everything just goes through coin weighted polling, but sort of more of a multimodal governance, which I've seen in some DAOs. I'm trying to remember which DAO it was that has established sort of like, there's the coin holder body, and then there's like a body of representatives that are like well-known people or whatever.
That would be interesting. I mean, ultimately, I think this obviously could completely derail this entire conversation by going out off-roading it. But I think it would be interesting to see one of the best metrics of success of a project as far as like scaling and the ability to use it has been total fees generated. It's kind of like revenue for a company. And so it would be nice to be able to, I mean, obviously this would be a giant privacy violation in non-encrypted coins, right? But if you could have a zero knowledge proof way of basically seeing which account had spent the most over a period of time, or like
Mm.
kind of triangulate that between time, total fees, and a number of interactions is a number of transactions, and then just add like a weight, like an important, a basically community participation weight, and you could pull
Yeah.
that like the most provably active invested users, and then the investor class, and then just kind of see those. That would be something that'd be interesting, but again, that sounds very difficult to do compared to where we're at now.
Yeah, no, I like that idea. I love thinking about those kinds of mechanisms. So that might be cool too, is another way to weight polls outside of like how many coins you have. Um,
Yeah. So, as far as the rationale behind proof of stake, what were the first?
mhm.
I mean, obviously, proof of work's been working so far. What
Yeah.
are the key reasons why to even consider a change?
So we posted a blog post that has, I think, 6 or 7 reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I remember the ones that seem most important to me.
Mm-hmm.
So the one that seems most important to me is that I believe proof of stake can actually allow more people to participate in receiving um, uh, newly issued coins or coin rewards
Mm.
than proof of work, and more people um, in a more even distribution. And the reason is related to like economies of scale. So if you want to be a miner, you need to afford like mining equipment and all of the infrastructure around that, and then you have to pay for the energy to run the miner. Um, and because of economies of scale, larger miners uh, have like an outsized proportion of the rewards, if that makes sense. So like
Yes, of course.
yeah, if you have like a miner with one machine and a miner with 10 of the same model of machine, um, the miner with 10 machines probably has sort of like lower average costs for the space that they run the miners in, the energy they use, the maintenance, and so on and so forth. So they actually get more than 10 times the revenue of the smaller miner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's possible that proof of stake evens that out a bit more so that small stakers can earn like the same percentage return as large stakers or
Yeah.
close to the same.
So that's the best consideration, is to basically let this be a more open participation system and not in the hands of a fewer larger actors.
Yeah, in terms of distributing the coins for um, in payment for like maintaining the network.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm in the process of releasing a series of interviews on the proof of work versus proof of stake versus hybrid models kind of thing. So there's a
Mhm.
lot more of that kind of. We could go. It's a giant rabbit hole.
Yeah.
I also think it's interesting how like one of the bigger criticisms of proof of stake is that you can't, if you start proof of stake, you start with like either an ICO or something like that, or a founder owning literally all of the coins, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like, it seems like it's as far as this fair distribution is concerned, it seems almost like a inverting scale over time, where you
Mhm.
start out with, you want it to be mined and sown to the winds so everyone gets a piece of it, and then over time that starts to calcify, and switching to proof of stake once it's well distributed kind of gives a lot of opportunity, gives more opportunity for average people to come in and participate.
Yeah. Yeah. So um, you asked about timing. So one thing, proof of stake has been on our minds at Electric Coin Company on and off over the years anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But we uh, one thing is we just wanted to wait to see Ethereum do a proof of stake
Mm-hmm.
transition to learn from it and see if there were any disasters first.
Yeah.
And the jury might still be out in certain respects. with Ethereum. But um, so a funny thing about that is Ethereum, their transition to proof of stake was always like 2 years out, but it lasted like 7 years. So we've had plenty of other stuff to focus on for Zcash, and it hasn't been as important a priority previously. But with the latest upgrade, which is now called NU5, which includes the new Halo zero knowledge proving system, that's like a major breakthrough in zero knowledge proving. And now that that's sort of out, proof of stake seems like a more important priority. But you asked about timing, and our thinking had been, okay, after this Halo 2 deployment in the latest upgrade in U5, we'll turn our attention to proof of stake. And that's sort of what we had said in our plans for Electric Coin Company's vision for the future. But the Zcash network has been experiencing like a lot of performance and usability issues. And so now we've like turned our focus on that. So we're focused, especially in the short term, we're focused on like improving acute pain points. But then a bit of a longer term, like the next year or 18 months, we actually want to make some usability and like some substantial usability and performance improvements for shielded wallets so that they can perform really well even when the base blockchain has like a high load or most blocks are full.
Yeah.
So that's sort of been prioritized over transitioning to proof of stake.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So now let's hit the meat of the subject of, privacy, the zero knowledge proving mechanisms, etc. So well, I remember, when Zcash first came out, I do remember there was a little bit of almost everyone used transparent addresses. Almost everyone used just the base, Bitcoin style kind of thing because it was, difficult and computationally expensive and just the tools weren't really out there. Although I do remember witnessing what might have been one of the first point of sale purchases of a good or service with a shielded Zcash transaction, which a friend of mine, Neil at the Free State Bitcoin shop, was there with his laptop doing the command line wallet and shielding a transaction over a long period. But it took a while, but he succeeded. And so that's obviously not the world we live in today, nor is it a world we want to live in today. But that's kind of how it started. So in the very, very beginning, it was basically full node wallets only, kind of for shielding. Is that correct?
Yeah. The reason is, there were multiple reasons, but the original shielded technology, which we call Sprout, by the way, it's in order to generate a shielded transfer, it would require gigabytes of RAM and somewhere between 30 seconds to 2 minutes on a laptop. So full node only wallets, and you would put in the destination address and the amount and a memo if you wanted and click send, and then your laptop fan would heat up and you'd sit there for a minute watching the spinner, hoping your machine didn't run out of RAM. So super heavyweight. Then in 2018 we had an upgrade called Sapling, and that introduced a new zero knowledge proving protocol. So it changed which zero knowledge proving system it was using, and then it also we did a lot of work on optimizing what's called the circuit. So that's sort of your zero knowledge application has to be specified, and up until now, designing zero knowledge circuits has been a very bespoke thing. So a metaphor I kind of use is it's more like if you're building digital hardware in like the 70s or 80s, where you're like drawing out circuit boards and like prototyping things and soldering them together. Um, and today we're starting to see like an emergence of much better tooling. So uh, it's easier for a broader range of developers to just sort of specify the logic that they want, and that will generate a circuit for them. But at the time, we spent a lot of effort sort of hand tuning and hand optimizing the circuit for sapling. And the end result was now you could generate a shielded transfer like on a mobile phone, and it would take like about 4 or 5 seconds. So we went from that first generation of it's on your laptop, takes a few minutes, takes gigabytes of RAM, to works on a mobile phone. It takes, like maybe dozens of megabytes of RAM, and it can be accomplished in, 4 or 5 seconds. So that was a major breakthrough for usability.
It sounds like that. And as I've been, using various forms of, cryptocurrency and privacy tech over the years, I do remember that there was a point somewhere around that time where it was kind of the holy grail was trustless privacy on mobile, because from my understanding, Monero and then a bunch of CoinJoin implementations still required you trust a node or a central, whoever, with your privacy at least, to where you would have to basically give your view keys to, in the case of Monero, for example, to whichever node was actually broadcasting that transaction, whichever full node, and being able to actually, I don't believe that's entirely the case anymore, but it was kind of a big barrier. And so the ability to,
you mean specifically for like shielded for private mobile wallets?
Yes.
Not the base protocol, but the mobile wallet would need to have some like privacy exposure to a backend service.
Yes, because if you run a full blockchain node, you can do everything yourself. If you don't, you have to plug into a full node somewhere. I mean, obviously, I'm glossing over some extra details there, but in order for the node to know what to broadcast, you have to share some information with it, and that means compromising some level of privacy. And so, having that kind of that sapling level thing where you can generate it on your mobile device and not really have to worry about all that, kind of is a pretty good, big. I see the expression in your face. It's like there's a little bit of a well actually in there, but anyway, go ahead on that.
Yeah, no, there is, because I think that I'm not as familiar with Monero, but I'm guessing it's relatively easy to actually like generate a transaction on a light device, like a mobile device.
Yeah.
The hard problem, and I think this is true of all private blockchain systems, is for the mobile device to get the right information from the blockchain. Because if you like reach out to a backend like if you know what information to get and you reach out to a backend service and you're like, give me that transaction and that transaction, then that service knows, oh, this wallet's interested in just those 2 transactions. Why is that? Right? So there's this real challenge between bandwidth versus privacy for mobile wallets that want privacy. And sapling, sapling itself didn't address that, but at the same time, or I think it was after sapling activated, then we worked on a mobile wallet protocol that we call Light Wallet D. And when we were designing that, there's this fundamental trade-off between bandwidth and privacy, and we chose an option that has like really strong privacy and really terrible bandwidth. So basically, when your mobile wallet contacts a backend server, it asks it to send every encrypted transaction to your mobile wallet, and then your mobile wallet figures out which ones are just to it. So that has really good privacy because the backend service can't tell which transactions the mobile wallet's interested in. But it's terrible for bandwidth and performance, and that's actually the kind of primary linchpin right now in the Zcash network, for shielded wallet performance. Like that's why people are having trouble, because every wallet's trying to download every shielded transaction, which is just not scalable.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's not specific to Sapling.
Yeah.
So there's sort of like the on-chain privacy protocol, and then there's this other group of protocols that are really important for supporting shielded or encrypted mobile wallets.
Mm-hmm.
And there's common challenges across all cryptocurrencies for that second category.
Yeah, and so Sapling just made the proofs a lot more lightweight, so that the second thing, being able the what Light Wallet D, would be able to be feasible in a certain sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we can start. Sapling is 2018, correct?
Yeah.
And what's happened since then on the privacy front?
Yeah. On the privacy front, I took notes because there's been
Yes.
4 upgrades since Sapling.
Mm-hmm.
We already talked about one of the big ones was setting up the dev fund.
Yeah.
Another one was doing shorter block times. There was one in 2020 called Heartwood that has a little tweak to privacy. And at the time, I heard some people criticizing that like it wasn't interesting or important, but I believe in retrospect it was actually crucial. So
Yeah.
that change was that oh no, sorry, I'm confusing this with something. This one was just a little tweak, and that is if a miner, if they want to, can receive the Coinbase rewards directly to a shielded address instead of to a transparent address.
Yeah, and I mean, that might sound like a small tweak, but I think it's enormous. That's one of the reasons why people do mine. I mean, part of it just to make money, but a lot of times people mine when it's not profitable because there's a market premium on privacy, and receiving fresh, untainted Coinbase coins seems to trade at a significant premium. And of course, if you take that into a transparent address and then have to go shield it later, that adds an extra step and makes it less attractive. But if you just get it right there, that makes it incredibly attractive.
Yeah. What I was confusing it with was we at launch. Oops, sorry. Did I bump something? Anyway,
I think you're good.
So at launch, we decided to introduce a consensus rule that the Coinbase rewards cannot be spent to a transparent address. So they must go into a shielded address. They must be shielded. So that meant all mining revenue event would need to be shielded before it could move on. But you're right that it was like an extra step. So this tweak in 2020 just allows miners to skip one step if they want to.
Yeah.
But that design choice, I believe, was really important. When I'm thinking about the context of like right now in Ethereum, most of the blocks being built are being done by this system called Flashbots.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
And as a policy, Flashbots censors addresses that are on the OFAC list, which probably makes sense for those participants to do, or it might not make sense. I don't know if it's required for them to do that or if they are doing it preemptively. But either way, it brings to question this idea of, well, like if we can distinguish like some funds are tainted and some aren't, then why don't regulators might misguided regulators might just have a rule that like the base blockchain just can't support tainted things.
Yeah.
And so the reason we made that design choice is we thought if we didn't have that restriction and miners just mined to transparent addresses and then funds flowed out into the system, some of the funds would never get shielded and they would just flow to exchanges or whatever. And then someday somebody might say, well, if any funds have ever been shielded or ever come out of the shielded pool, all of that's tainted and it's going to be disallowed. and that's sort of analogous to censoring like Tornado Cash or Aztec or an Ethereum privacy smart contract, because most Ethereum hasn't flowed through that smart contract. If Ethereum could like introduce a rule that all new issued Ethereum had to go through one of those systems, that might be that's something I'm curious about, because that sort of forces all funds on equal footing. Like all funds, even if they're now outside of the shielded system, they came from it originally. So it sort of like removes the taint or the untainted coins premium. That's sort of the thinking of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's very important, because at some point people might just say, if you use a privacy thing, it's tainted. And I have had, I don't think I have personally, but I have known of people who have used CoinJoin to purchase certain things, or do like one of those instant swap systems. It's kind of like sort of like a Thorchain analogous to Thorchain, but a centralized system. And when they use CoinJoin, their funds get frozen. They have to produce identity. They have to KYC in order to do that, because it just detects that. And so I'm sure a lot of exchanges, also I know a lot of exchanges risk score based on, I guess, history of the coin. And if it came from some too recent of a coin join, they might ask for extra information for certain amounts. And so if that doesn't mean anything, if that's just the coin, then that kind of makes it a non-issue. It kind of prevents those sort of lazy ways of compromising crypto's base privacy in order to just try to get rid of or discourage bad activity.
Yeah.
So after that, where are we now?
Okay, so Sapling allowed basically shielded mobile wallets to start being developed, and we've introduced this Light Wallet D protocol to support that. And then the next big upgrade just happened in May, and we call that NU5. And that introduces a new shielded payment protocol called Orchard. So there's a bit of terminology going on here, because we have a different name for the payment protocol, Orchard, versus the upgrade. Because in the past, we used the same name for both, and that ended up confusing people on a technical level.
Yeah. So
Orchard is just a new way to do shielded transfers and storage. But it's, and so it has the same functionality as Sapling, basically. And really importantly, it is within the same ballpark in terms of performance. So it still works on mobile devices, because that was a key requirement for us. But the big thing is it's implemented on top of this new zero-knowledge proving system called Halo 2. And Halo 2 is really awesome and exciting. But one of the most immediate things for Zcash is that it doesn't require trusted setups. So we didn't really talk about trusted setups yet.
Yeah, might be a good point to jump into that. I think the trusted setups is one of the most covered topics about Zcash, both by Zcash fans and proponents, and people who participate in the setup, and amongst detractors. And one thing I've noticed from just the last month or so, most haters, as it were, don't even know that the trusted setup isn't a thing anymore.
Yeah. I mean, it is to some degree. So let me dig into that a little bit. So first, let's just explain what it is in case some listeners don't know. But these zero-knowledge proving systems previously required something called a trusted setup. I hate that word. I don't like trusted, because it's ambiguous what that means. Like, because some people hear that and they're like, oh, yeah, I should trust it. But what it really means in like in a technical security sense is if you rely on this thing, you're relying on whoever did this setup for your security. So the trusted setup that we did for the launch was this process that involved 6 participants, and it was necessary in order for the shielded transfers to work. And it has the property that as long as any one of those 6 participants was honest and didn't get hacked, then the resulting system would be secure. If all 6 of them got hacked or colluded, then that would give an attacker an ability to counterfeit coins on Zcash. So basically, everyone who uses Zcash has to trust that it has to rely on the fact that at least one of those participants wasn't hacked or malicious for them to rely on sort of the monetary supply integrity.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction too, because while that is a very critical part of the coin, I think a lot of it has been misrepresented as the entire privacy scheme is reliant on that as well. That like, if one of those 6 had been, if all of them had colluded or been compromised, then the entire zero knowledge proof privacy function is suspect. And that's kind of the idea that I think has been bandied around a little bit.
Yeah, that's completely not true. So if somebody hacked the setup, none of the privacy of Zcash would be harmed. The impact of hacking the setup is that they can do counterfeiting. An attacker can do counterfeiting, but they still can't violate the privacy guarantees directly. They could do other stuff like generate 1,000 times more transactions than everyone else or something, but they can't directly, in order to try to, I don't know, there's no direct harm to the privacy. So that's a really important point.
Yeah, and so the trusted setup was essentially done away with. And I do remember hearing Zuko talk about this before, about how one of the researchers basically said, I think I could figure out how to get rid of this. And then he just basically was told, his coworkers were told to just leave him alone until he could figure it out. And then after like 6 months or so, he did figure it out.
Yeah. That was Sean Bowe. And, he was collaborating with others on our team, but he did a lot of the discovery there. And that is what became Halo 2. Before that, for Sapling, which was the first upgrade that enabled mobile phones, it still has a trusted setup, but we improved that process so it involved hundreds of participants. But it's still like the same story. You got to, if somebody's, showing up to Zcash 30 years from now, the story would have to be, oh, well, once upon a time there was 100 people, and as long as one of them was good, the monetary supply is good. And that's just like a weird, confusing story if somebody's going to be trusting this to store their value, So we got rid of that with Halo 2 in the last upgrade in May, and that's a huge thing. Now, it hasn't, so funds can still be stored on the blockchain in what's called the Sprout pool or the Sapling pool. And you can think of those as like a big bucket of funds that hold funds for a bunch of different users that use those technologies. And so a user can like transfer funds out of, say, the Sprout pool over into the Sapling pool to start using the newer technology. And they can do the same now. They could transfer from either of those or transparent into the Orchard pool. So the Orchard pool doesn't have any trusted setup, but the Sapling and Sprout pool still do. And so this gets a little more in the weeds, but each pool has what's called a turnstile. So it has a total public known amount, and that can't go below zero. So if there is a counterfeiting attack in one of the technologies, like let's say sapling,
Mm-hmm.
um, the attacker can basically fool wallets and full nodes into believing they have new sapling coins that weren't ever mined. So they're counterfeiting them. Um, and if they start doing that, the actual amount of coins in the sapling pool will grow larger than the public turnstile amount.
Yeah.
And then if all of those coins try to exit, eventually the turnstile will hit zero, and
Mm-hmm.
any remaining coins in there will be bricked.
Yeah.
So this is somewhat confusing, but the goal of it is that over the longer term, as we introduce new technologies or new pools like this, um, older pools will drain. And we know that the total in the newer pools has the right total supply. So it's sort of protecting the long term supply of Zcash, even if there's a counterfeit attack in one of the technologies.
Yeah. And so if there was a counterfeit attack, it doesn't actually affect the eventual supply of the coin. It just would
Yeah.
possibly mean that an attacker would get funds, whereas some people, and we're just talking worst case scenario, right? But
Yeah.
where legitimate owners would not be, would basically have their funds become useless if the attacker kind of redeemed coins that would have been theirs.
Yeah. So if you are on Zcash now and you
Mm-hmm.
have coins in the sapling pool, most of the shielded coins are still in the sapling pool, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Orchard is just starting to ramp up. Um, if you have coins in the sapling pool and there were some hack of the trusted setup for sapling,
Yeah.
and you wait too long, and so there's a counterfeit attack and you wait too long, you might lose all of the coins in sapling. So that might be a reason you want to like get a newer wallet and migrate them to the Orchard pool, because the Orchard pool didn't have any trusted setup, no possibility of it getting hacked. So in that sense, it could be safer. It could still have like critical security flaws um, that allow counterfeiting. Um, I mean, that's still a possibility, but
Mm-hmm.
there's no trusted setup, so it couldn't come from that.
Yeah. So it's more like it might even be an interesting assumption of some people keeping their funds in the older pools might just be waiting to see if something critical is discovered in the newer pools. And
Yeah,
they'd be like, I trust those 6 guys, or I trust those 100 guys who did this more than I trust currently the robustness of the newest technology. And once it's out for a little while,
yeah,
then I'll eventually get to moving it over. Or more
yep,
likely, they just haven't, they don't even don't know about it, or they just haven't cared to get around to it yet.
yep, exactly.
Yeah, so that brings us up to the present day. And so right now, Zcash is a pretty robust privacy tool with a lot of different with a lot of functionality, in particular on mobile wallets that kind of doesn't really exist too well around the rest of the crypto world,
Mhm.
and with a bunch of interesting stuff on the horizon. What is the one thing you're kind of most excited about for the future of Zcash? Like, obviously, everything you built so far is cool. Everything that you
Yeah,
collaborated on. But if it's the one thing that keeps you going, like you just like, I can't wait to get in the office today because we're headed towards this cool thing, what would
yeah.
that be?
So I would have to say right now it is shielded mobile wallet scalability improvements.
Mm-hmm.
So right now with the Light Wallet D protocol, like I said, it has really strong privacy, but is really inefficient and doesn't scale well, and that's hampering users today. Um, I'm really excited about the potential, like maybe in the 18-month time range, to introduce a new light wallet support protocol that will change. So currently, if you're using a Zcash shielded wallet, it has to do something called scanning, where it's basically downloading every shielded transaction from the backend service
Mm-hmm.
and then trying to decrypt it to see if it's an incoming payment. I'm pretty optimistic we could make a new protocol where shielded wallet recipients can get just only the transactions that they need, and it can happen like shortly after the transactions are made. And so those wallets won't need to scan the blockchain anymore. And so incoming payments, like you'll just open your wallet and it'll just see new payments within like half a second. Even if the base blockchain is like totally full and the blockchain size is growing really large, the mobile wallets will still be super responsive. So that's what I'm super motivated by right now, because I think that improvement will be really important for shielded mobile wallets.
Yeah, and I think as someone who does a lot of stuff in like the end user space of the crypto world, it's kind of interesting to where incremental improvements to user experience have, I guess, a tipping point where it's, even though there's a bunch of incremental improvements, there's like a binary of will people use it or not. And once you hit to the point of it's good enough that people use it, all of a sudden it goes from almost no one using it to almost everyone. And so that could be, that's one of those things about those like incremental, like never knock the incremental changes, because they can pile up to be a conclusion where, yes, now this is worth using.
Yeah. So it's hard to answer the only one thing, because the transition to proof of stake and also interoperating with other blockchains are super exciting. But I feel like focusing on this usability issue for shielded wallets is totally called for right now because it's needed to support the current usage.
Yeah.
But also, I think it might be the protocols and technology behind it might actually help us with some of the interoperability or transition to proof of stake in the future. So I'm really excited about figuring out how feasible that is also.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Well, this has been quite the enlightening chat. Where could people find more about you and follow what you do? Or where in general would you like to direct the people?
Yeah, I am on Twitter. And this is pretty hilarious. I'm trying to look up my profile name. I think it's Nate Zach.
Yes, it's something along those lines. Let me actually write.
It's Nate underscore Zach.
ZEC. Yes.
Yeah, ZEC. So I tweet there. I'm usually, I would say like 80% of my tweets are about Zcash. But if people are less familiar about Zcash, they could go to z.cash. That's like a community focused website with just basic overviews, how to get started, what is it. There's a Zcash community forum. You can just search for that. There's a Zcash Discord. And then there's like, if you're interested in development, there's like a public developer call called Arborist Call. So there's a lot of ways to get involved. Come check them out.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, yeah, thanks very much for spending your time here, and I hope you have a good one.
Yeah, thanks.